All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Again, I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar today, where we will be scratching the surface of designing an innovation process. We'll show you different common models and share some important considerations for developing an innovation process for both small and large organizations. You can always find more information by contacting us directly at ideascale.com. Let's go ahead and start with some introductions for the day. My name is Sean Miller, and I'm joined by one of IdeaScale's senior analysts, Jessica Day, who will be helping answer a few questions at the end of the webinar. Feel free to submit all of your questions throughout the presentation in the dedicated questions section, and Jessica and I will address them together during the Q&A session. The agenda today is very straightforward. We'll be discussing some background on why it's important to design a structured innovation framework. We'll look at some different concepts and models and think through a generalized approach that you can use to build a formal innovation process at your organization. Next, we'll demonstrate an example workflow using IdeaScale's innovation management platform, and finally, answer some questions that the audience has today. As a bonus, I do also want to mention that after this webinar is over, we'll be emailing everyone some additional industry resources related to building an innovation process. So let's go ahead and get started. Why is it so important to build a structured innovation process? Well, every day, companies large and small bet huge sums of money on risky initiatives, important long-term investments, new products, new ad campaigns, new markets, new factories, mergers and partnerships, and more. However, a 2016 study by the Harvard Business School suggests that 70 to 90% of these plans will fail over a 12-month period. So a question that we should all be asking ourselves is there a way to safeguard against these failures? And risk is always going to be weighed against reward. Bigger the risks, the bigger the rewards. Which brings us to the task at hand, and the topic for today: how do we build a process that monitors these unknown innovations and calculates the risk of these big, hairy, audacious goals? And that's a term that Jim Collins uses in his book Built to Last to describe how designing a process to identify and track and evaluate these big, hairy, audacious goals can be, in fact, more important than having that initial idea in the first place. As we go through the models today, you'll notice that they reflect a lot of the innovation models out in the marketplace right now. There's no right or wrong model. Each one is unique and configured specifically to produce the outcomes and results that each organization wants to achieve. We'll discuss and demonstrate several of these common models for you today. The first decision that you'll be faced with is how to approach innovation. Who will be invited to participate, who will evaluate, and how much access or transparency will these participants have? There are three general approaches to innovation that I think it's important to discuss before we jump into the models. The first one is closed innovation. Closed innovation describes an innovation process with a single dedicated team, either an innovation team or a continuous improvement team, or a dedicated market research team whose sole mission is to find new opportunities and new markets for that organization to dive into. The next approach is called co-innovation. The co-innovation approach uses dedicated teams and potentially several departments within the organization, and trusted advisors within the value chain to help identify innovative solutions for the organization to chase. The final approach is open innovation, where dedicated teams, internal departments, partners and trusted advisors, and also external participants and external advisors are invited in to help generate new ideas for the organization. This is a relatively new approach where anyone has the potential to contribute, from an internal employee to a customer to a partner inside the value chain and outside the value chain, and even the general public. It should be noted that open innovation has demonstrated tremendous success when generating many different ideas, considering different backgrounds and education, perspectives, targeting public audiences around the world. Whichever approach you and your organization decide to use, study these three approaches for a moment and you'll come to realize that they all have one commonality: funneling many ideas, depending on the source, into a few select actionable ideas. Some ideas are reviewed and found not actionable. Some ideas are actionable today. Some ideas are actionable in the future. This is an important concept to realize, as all models and all processes follow this same concept, taking many ideas, no matter where the source, funneling them, reviewing them, refining them, and generating very concrete proposals to be implemented later on. Let's go ahead and look at some common decision-making models that lend themselves nicely to the innovation management process. All of these models have been used and are being used by IdeaScale customers using our platform in a variety of different ways. Design thinking, human-centered design, agile work cadences, Six Sigma, lean methodologies, and many others. Each organization will adopt a methodology and a model that fits their needs. Some are more focused on incremental innovation or continuous improvement, while others focus on more transformational and disruptive innovations, new concepts that haven't been tried out yet for that organization or for that industry or marketplace. The important thing to remember is developing a framework that is flexible and transparent for those involved at your organization. Flexibility and transparency is key because the workforce trend is moving in a direction where people need to connect with ideas faster, in a clear, free-flowing, and digital way. An effective innovation process is one that supports the human side, one that takes a back seat to the collection and discussion of ideas and ensures ease of communication and engagement throughout the process. You want the focus to be on the innovations and the ideas, not the management process itself. You'll see during our example of how IdeaScale goes about tackling this. Let's take a moment now and break these models down and look at some of the commonalities. No matter what model you adopt, they all follow the same general principles. But pause for a moment and let's acknowledge that these terms are all very industry-oriented jargon. It's vague, it's boring, and it's not very much help when you're thinking about a concept for the first time. So let's look at it from a slightly different perspective here. Each principle revolves around a question or a set of questions that need to be answered. The first question is, why do we need this? Understanding the need, the why, this is your innovation intent. Innovation drivers can be ambiguous organizational leaders, changing environments, market competition, changing customer needs, or changing stockholder desires. All of these need to be considered as you determine why you want to innovate. The next question is, what is the problem? As covered in our previous webinar, opportunity or problem identification is an important step in building the correct framework around an innovation process. Focusing on the wrong problem won't actually satisfy the innovation driver, that first question of why do we need this? Once the opportunity is identified, identifying what the best fix is the next step. This is the ideation or idea generation phase to collect insights on the best way forward. Ideas can be submitted. Ideas are evaluated and refined into concept proposals, new products, new business processes, entirely new markets, and fields of play are discussed and developed into actionable implementation plans. The next question to look at is, how do I build it? Here you'll consider ways to prototype new products, develop new services, and identify new partners. The last question in the simplified innovation process is focused on the support structure, the growth structure, helping you monitor and build the initial concept into a successful reality and a successful business unit or new service for the long term. These are the 5 questions that you'll want to continually ask yourself as you're building a process. Now let's move on and look at where innovation can happen within an organization. Where are the different areas that you want to focus to develop a clear innovation process? These 5 different innovation areas represent an ecosystem where innovation opportunities can exist, and there are more sub-areas within each that can be explored in more detail. What is important to consider are the differences in each area. The people, the focus, the procedures, systems, and resources that are all involved. A proper innovation management process considers all of these factors, identifies and plans the necessary steps ahead of time to work in and around these constraints and opportunities. This is why flexibility is important. You need to be able to adapt your process to each area without having to recreate the wheel each time. Some of the biggest challenges that you may face are around engaging the right departments and the right areas and the right people at the right times, and scaling that process across your organization. You may also face the challenge of how to weigh the differences between value or quality of an idea versus the total quantity of ideas. This topic will actually be covered in a later webinar on how to evaluate good ideas. So please stay tuned and we'll send out more information on that webinar at a later date. Let's stay focused on building a process for right now. And this is a good point to continue the discussion around necessary resources and some questions to consider. For example, what resources can you leverage internally and externally? Which areas of innovation do you want to focus on now, depending on your problem identification, and in the future? Which departments and groups of people do you want to participate, and at what point should you engage them? Do different people and different departments have different objectives and outcomes that they want to see as a result of this process? Are those outcomes different than yours? How do you align those objectives and create a symbiotic relationship? What kind of process or program can you build with the budget that you have available? Employees' working time, hardware, software, and other resources that impact budget should be considered here. And lastly, time frame. Do you have a specific deadline in mind for delivering a new product or service? Or is there an ideal launch date when you want employees or partners to start participating in any kind of ideation phase? There are a lot of questions here to consider. So I want to offer an easy to access resource for everyone on the webinar today. There's an organization that IdeaScale partnered with called innovationmanagement.se. Their website hosts an entirely free knowledge base of articles, research studies, blogs, and videos to help you think through the appropriate questions and when to ask them. I would highly encourage everyone to bookmark it and refer back to it when the time is right and you need the information. Okay, let's return to the generalized innovation model and the questions that we just discussed. We're going to dive into an example and demonstration of a new product campaign with the design thinking methodology. I encourage you to think about these questions as we run through it together. All right, what you're looking at here is the IdeaScale community for innovation management. You can see we have several active campaigns right now. Let's go ahead and dive into the new product ideas campaign. In the new product ideas campaign, you can see a very transparent framework on the right-hand side here that takes into consideration design thinking. Empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test are the 5 different stages of design thinking. This particular campaign picks up after the research and empathy stage, where Jason Oliver, the VP of Product, has already identified the why and identified the problem. We move into the second stage of design thinking, the define stage, by defining the opportunity at hand to innovate new products and delight customers. We then invite our innovation audience to ideate by submitting new ideas and reviewing existing ideas by voting and commenting on them. You can see here a list of ideas that have already been submitted for this new product campaign. If we dive into one, this heart rate monitor idea, you can see a detailed description of the idea here and further discussion of the idea with value adds in this comment section. This is the post and vote, or the ideate stage, where the conversation is starting to form and ideas are being submitted. Next, we advance to the initial assessment stage, where we evaluate ideas for prototyping. You can see in this particular framework, we are very detail-oriented and have several stages around building teams to refine and review ideas based on metrics and impact criteria that ultimately determine the return on investment of that idea. Next, we move into selecting the ideas and proposals that are ready for funding and have received the green light for prototyping. Now, you'll notice the 5th and final stage of design thinking is testing, and this campaign funnel is missing a testing stage. So let's quickly add that. We're going to go into community settings. We're going to look at the workflow and the funnel in this particular campaign. We're going to open the funnel here, and we're going to quickly edit. You can see here all the different stages. If we needed to move a stage, very easy to do. If we needed to delete a stage, right there, or make edits to any stage, we can go ahead and do that here. We're going to add the testing stage. This is a review stage where we're asking additional questions about this testing. So we're going to scroll down here and add one question to describe the testing. And we're going to add one additional question to ask if this prototype is ready to be released. We're going to scroll down and save those changes. And you'll see that stage has now been added to that funnel. If we quickly go back to that campaign and that workflow, you'll see it now appear as the last step in this funnel.